happening on the Labour left. I'll ask a senior judge whether the arrest of hundreds for supporting Palestine action is sensible, and will ponder whether the government should be forcing us to save more for our pensions. It has been a fascinating day here at Westminster. Join me after the news.
On your radio, on the LBC app, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 6 o'clock, a man has been found guilty of murdering a couple before disposing of their remains on Clifton Suspension Bridge in Bristol. 35-year-old Colombian Yostin Mosquera killed Albert Alfonso and Paul Longworth at their flat in West London. Detective Inspector Neil Mead from Avon and Somerset Police says it was a disturbing discovery following reports from staff.
Police went to the bridge and the officers that were first on the scene had their worst nightmare come true. They located the suitcases, could feel they were heavy, and opened the suitcases to find some body parts within those suitcases.
He's due to be sentenced in October. The UK and 24 other countries have accused Israel of drip-feeding aid into Gaza and condemned the killing of Palestinians seeking food. Israel says the statement is disconnected from reality. Detectives searching for a missing woman have found a body in a lake in Cheshire. 38-year-old Rachel Booth from Barnton was reported missing on Saturday. And the High Court has cleared the way for plans to triple the size of Wimbledon. The All England club wants to build 38 new tennis courts and an 8,000-seat stadium on the grounds of a former golf club. The campaigners had tried to challenge the plans, claiming there were restrictions on how the land could be used. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed up 20 points at 90.12. The pound buys $1.34 and €1.15. LBC weather largely cloudy with showers in central and western areas tonight. Generally dry elsewhere, a low of 11 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Amelia Cox.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. It's 6 p.m. Now, Tonight with Andrew Marr.
Good evening. Now, this is hardly news just in, but the economy seems pretty broken. As Labour argues about a wealth tax and benefits, and the housing market goes a bit fut, and the bond markets hover, licking their lips, it doesn't feel to me as if this system is really working well for anyone. Over the weekend, I was reading a book set just after the 2008 financial crash. In it, a city trader says this: "The rich get the assets, the poor get the debt, and then the poor have to pay their whole salary to the rich every year just to live in a house. The rich use that money to buy the rest of the assets from the middle class, and then the problem gets worse every year. The middle class disappears, spending power disappears permanently from the economy, the rich become something richer, and the poor, well, I guess they just die." That is a slightly cleaned-up quote from The Trading Game, the memoir of the former Citibank trader Gary Stevenson, an East Ender who made millions, in fact probably squillions, before falling out of love with the trading game and leaving to campaign for a different kind of economy, a more just economy. On a day when the government's trying to get us to pay more into our pensions and prepare to retire later, and when the Prime Minister has been pummeled in Parliament about the plight of homeless people, I've been wondering about the similarities and the differences between the economy now and back 15 years ago after the financial crash, and what, if anything, we have learned since. And Gary is with me in the studio now. Welcome, Gary. Can you start by taking us right back to when you were, 8 or 9 years old, and you're in the East End looking out over the terraced house windows to the Canary Wharf, blinking in the distance?
Yeah, of course. I grew up in Ilford, East London, a little terraced house with my family, crowded little house, playing football on the streets, going the street. And when I was a kid, that's when the Canary Wharf skyscrapers first went up. So we were very poor growing up, but I was always very good at maths. So I think you just kind of assume if you're good at maths, you're going to go work in those skyscrapers one day. So I worked pretty hard. I had a few ups and downs, got very good grades at maths, managed to go to the London School of Economics, a very fancy economics uni in London. I entered a card game I won a card game, which is where the title of the book, The Trading Game, comes from. So in 2005, I won this card game competition for Citibank called The Trading Game. And that's how I got my job as the youngest trader in the city, starting in the beginning of 2008.
And it was a really, really strange and alien world when you walked into it. Quite scary. Some fairly scary people all around you.
Yeah, a lot of big people for some reason. I'm not the biggest guy. A lot of big guys. There's this kind of myth of the sort of Cockney wide boy trader, which some people might think I fit. But in reality, nowadays, and even back then in the 2000s, it was a lot of rich guys from rich families, basically. A lot of people sort of boarding school, private school. And it wasn't the most polite place to work. At one point, a guy barked at me like a dog and growled at me like a wolf because he thought I'd got him in trouble for drinking too much. Let's say it was a very testosterone-filled environment.
And in this testosterone-fueled environment, you do very, very well. You make a lot of money for the bank and for yourself. And it goes on and on and on. And it's a time when the British economy, like many economies around the world, pretty much flat on its back. Yeah. People really, really scared. Homelessness beginning to spread again. A real sense that the world financial system isn't working. And the real reason you're here is for me to ask you how different things are today.
Well, I think it's amazing. So I worked in the aftermath of the 2008 crisis. I started working just before the 2008 crisis started, and I was super young. I was 21, and it was crazy because the specific desk that I worked on in Citibank in Canary Wharf started to make a ton of money during 2008, and obviously this is when the global economy is collapsing. A lot of my friends from university were losing their jobs, but the guys I was working with were making tons and tons of money, and I was 21 and I was kind of desperately trying to figure out what was happening. But I think what is more interesting than the crash itself is how weak the recovery was afterwards. And everybody thought after 2008 that we were going to have this massive economic recovery.
Yeah.
And when COVID was happening, I don't know, it's easy to forget this now, but when COVID was happening, do you remember the Roaring '20s?
I do.
Do you remember the media saying we're going to have a Roaring '20s because of pent-up demand? You remember pent-up demand?
It's going to be fantastic.
So for me, sitting and watching COVID, I actually stopped trading for a long time. But when COVID happened, and I heard the economists and people on the news saying there's going to be a Roaring '20s, all this pent-up demand, I got my laptop out and I started trading again, because what I saw was basically exactly the same thing happening again, which was economic crisis being dealt with in such a way that the government pumps a ton of money in, nearly bankrupts itself. None of that money stays with ordinary people. It ends up getting accumulated by the rich. The rich get richer and richer and richer, and ordinary people suffer.
We come back to the quote I started with. Why does that happen? Try to explain to people why the money always ends up with the rich.
The best example is COVID. The best example is COVID, all right? So, do you know what the total government deficit is since the beginning of COVID?
About 100 billion or something?
$1 trillion. It's £1 trillion, which is £20,000 for every adult in the country. It's an unbelievably enormous number. Really, nothing economically matters except for that number because of the enormous scale of that number. We knew at the beginning of COVID, the government was going to pump maybe not £1 trillion, maybe £500 billion into the economy. If you are going to pump £500 billion from the government debt into the economy, you have to ask, who is going to end up with that money? Who is going to accumulate that money? And the most amazing thing happened during COVID, which was that nobody asked. So I did the analysis, right? Government pumps this money in. Where does it go? Furloughed workers. Do furloughed workers get richer? No. Because they just have to pay, they're not getting their wages anymore, right? They pay their bills, they pay their mortgage, it goes to the owners of the houses, the owners of the companies, rich people.
Which are the banks, ultimately.
Well, ultimately, it's rich people. And what do rich people do with the money during COVID? Nothing, because they can't spend it. What you saw during COVID was basically the greatest money laundering trick of all time. £1 trillion was pumped from the government through the poor to the rich.
So sort of liquid money, hot money, becomes a solid asset.
Yeah, well, rich people, if you give an ordinary person 10, 20 grand, they're going to spend it. If you give a rich person 20 grand, they're going to buy 20 grand worth of assets. And when I talk about I started trading again during COVID, the first thing I did was I opened my laptop and I bought £1 million worth of gold. And gold was collapsing because I knew, this enormous amount of money, £1 trillion, and the US number is, I think, $13 trillion. Once you ask and answer that question, where will the money end up? And you know it's going to be accumulated by the richest people in society. You know straight away, gold price will go up, house prices will go up, stock prices will go up, inflation will go up, because that's what these people do. They don't just sit on the money. It's
So
important
this is a broken system for ordinary people.
Yeah.
This is a broken system. You're going home to Ilford while this is happening. You're seeing people sleeping out in the streets. You're seeing boarded up houses and so on. And there comes a point when there's a kind of disgust grows inside you about the system, and you leave and you say, "I'm going to start to campaign for a different kind of economy." So, what is the essence of the better economy that you have as a vision?
I think we cannot accept an economy where wealth inequality grows and grows and grows and grows and grows. I want people to understand that when the rich get richer and richer and richer and richer, and in the last 5 years, that's happened at unbelievable speed, that wealth is not coming out of nowhere. So what we've seen in the last 5 years is this unbelievable increase in billionaire wealth, at the same time as collapsing government wealth, which is why we're having austerity now, collapsing middle-class wealth, which is why people can't afford homes. Those two things are connected. We need to fix this tax system, which at the moment taxes ordinary people 30, 40, 50% and sees billionaires inheriting tens of billions and paying nothing.
And yet we're just hearing this weekend from the government that they can't go for a wealth tax, as Neil Kinnock, for instance, has suggested, because it hasn't worked anywhere. It's been tried in lots of countries. It's never really worked. Therefore, guys, it's off the table. What do you say?
If you don't do something about this massive increase in billionaire wealth, which is squeezing wealth out of the rest of society, you have to accept that the middle class will disappear. You have to accept enormous increases in poverty. You have to accept the end of the welfare state. I don't want to accept those things. And I would speak to the government and I would say, listen, you have to be bigger in your ambitions.
So how do you get that money back? In practical terms, what would you do if you were Rachel Reeves?
Well, look, if we look at history, there's only really one case we have where wealth inequality significantly decreased, where wealth was transferred from the elites back to ordinary people. That was the 20th century. That was the aftermath of World War II. What we saw then was a massive transfer of wealth away from the elites towards the government, towards the middle class.
That was high levels of income tax.
Well, really, what it was the war. To be honest, it was the war. It was the war led to.
We don't want that.
Exactly, and that is. I'm not calling for a war because I don't want there to be a war. What I want is a fairer taxation system. I want to reduce tax on working people and I want to increase tax on billionaires.
And do you think it is possible, without sort of the flight of the rich and all the things that we're told about, to actually, as it were, take asset value, asset wealth back from the super rich back to the rest of us?
I think it is possible. Yeah, I want to be really clear, right? When I say this, tax the rich, tax the super rich, people often think I'm talking about lawyers, bankers, heaven forbid, even YouTubers and radio presenters. I'm talking about millionaires and billionaires here. I'm talking about individuals and families hoarding enormous amounts of wealth. The thing is, if we were to tax radio presenters, you could go and do this show from Dubai. Mm-hmm. But if I'm going to tax a billionaire, billionaires don't get their money from their work. They get their money from their assets, and their assets are here. Look what happened when the government suddenly decided it wanted to tax Roman Abramovich's assets. Roman Abramovich is on the first plane to Moscow. What does he own? Chelsea Football Club. These people are taxable because their assets are here. And I never said it will be easy. It won't be easy. If you do not tax them, I guarantee you poverty will continue to explode in this country. And I'm not just saying that, I'm betting on it. And I bet on it year after year, and I've made millions of pounds betting on it. And I don't want to be right this time.
Absolutely. Let's just think a little bit about the plight of this government right now, because, they're looking at the need for more cuts in welfare, squeezing the welfare budget, because the bond markets are looking at them and saying, you've lost control of the fiscal situation, therefore we're going to punish you, we're going to push interest rates up, and then you're scuppered. Yeah.
I think this is what happens when you have a naivety towards wealth. I talk about this £1 trillion. This £1 trillion didn't come from nowhere. That £1 trillion is on the government debt now. There's a really interesting graph. The French economist Thomas Piketty. So for those who don't know, this is a French economist, does a lot of work on wealth inequality. He made these graphs looking at how much wealth the government owns. And back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, the government of this country had a lot of wealth. It owned schools, it owned hospitals, and that meant it could provide public services. That collapsed during the 90s and 2000s. And then, during COVID, massively collapsed negative. Where has that wealth gone now? There is a phenomenal naivety about wealth in the economic conversation now. If you do not get that wealth back, you have no choice but to shut the welfare state down, which is why I was screaming at government before the election. I was screaming at Labour Party, because we knew they were coming in, listen, you need to do something about taxation, you need to do something about wealth. They were naive to that. They've walked into the situation, they've got no wealth, they're bankrupt, the rich are super rich, they are unwilling to tax them, and now they are left with basically no choice but to shut the welfare state down. Listen, this is what happens if you are naive about wealth. Wealth is hemorrhaging from government, from the middle class to the rich. If you do not stop that flow of wealth, you have no choice but to shut down the welfare state that our grandparents and great-grandparents fought and died for.
So what you want in the end is a political class with a bit of the testosterone, a bit of the cojones, a bit of the aggression that you saw on the trading floor.
A bit of ambition. I want to see, when I was working as a trader in Japan, I was complaining about the traders around me, and my junior said, the problem with these traders is they are men with small hearts. And I think that was translated directly from Japanese. But I see too much of that in politics. I want to see ambition. Listen, our grandparents, our great-grandparents, they were born in poverty. 3 of my grandma's siblings died of tuberculosis, a disease of poverty. And they fought for a fairer system, for a better distribution. And that is why me and my parents grew up with a welfare state, housing, education, healthcare, food. They fought for it, and they came from a worse position than us. They knew the importance of distribution and a fair share of the pie. We need to change the tax system, tax working people less, tax the super rich more, tax wealth not work.
Gary, what a thought-provoking, really, really interesting conversation. Thanks very, very much for coming into LBC, and congratulations on the trading game. Great book. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Now then, coming up, the police have described the protests over the weekend outside an asylum hotel in Epping as thuggery. In an already stiflingly hot summer, is there more unrest on the horizon? I'll be speaking to a former senior Met Police chief next. But the time now, 6:15.
Weekdays from 7 a.m.
So we don't know how many, and we don't know the cost.
Straight to the point.
Tell you what they're laughing at, those two. They're laughing at the law, and we're letting them.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC.
Inexcusable, shambolic failure.
Listen on Global Player or the new LBC app. Download it now from your app store. LBC.
Terms apply.
Tonight with Andrew Marr. Watch live on both Global Player and the new LBC app.
6:17. Well, the Prime Minister has been being questioned by Labour MPs today about child poverty, housing and the economy generally. The Home Office were answering questions this afternoon about asylum hotels and criminal behaviour by migrants, and the Reform leader, Nigel Farage, has promised huge new spending on prisons and deportations. Let's begin tonight with our political editor, Natasha Clark, who's had a busy day observing all of the above. Natasha, let's start off with the so-called liaison committee, which we should explain is the chairs of all the different Commons committees sitting together to put the Prime Minister under some pressure. What were the highlights?
Yeah, I mean, these sort of super committee appearances, Andrew, as you know, there's lots and lots of detail and lots of questions for the Prime Minister. It's a bit of an end-of-term report card, as it were, focusing today on two main things: child poverty and the work that the Prime Minister wants to do to bring that down, and foreign affairs, which you might think doesn't really go hugely well together. Obviously, on foreign affairs, something the Prime Minister is quite strong on. Lots of questions
Sounding
about...
confident.
Yeah, lots of questions about Gaza, lots of questions about sort of the Middle East and the work that he's doing on that, feeling quite confident on that front. Child poverty, I thought, was a little bit shaky, not hugely across some of the detail. We know this is something that lots of Labour MPs are privately very worried about, that the fact that government, they feel, isn't going far enough to tackle child poverty and do a lot. So he faced quite a grilling from some Labour MPs on that.
Well, the million-dollar question on that, of course, is whether or not he is going to lift the two-child cap on benefits, which would mean that families with more than 2 children will get more benefits. And that, every poverty campaigner says, is the crucial thing when it comes to ending child poverty or diminishing it. Did you get any indication at all of where he's going on that?
No, and I don't believe that he was asked directly about the two-child cap at all. But what he was asked about, and I thought he did give a bit of a hint on, was something called the local housing allowance, something that the government froze last year. It's the amount of money that you can get in housing benefit. And he did hint that that might be something which he can soften. And he basically said, well, at the budget, I'm going to be looking at lots of these things in the round. Of course, the government is coming forward with their child poverty strategy at some point in the next few months. That's all going to be feeding in. Obviously, he doesn't want to get ahead of the budget. He is so far out from it. He did say, these economic forecasts I'm getting are changing week in, week out. I can't make any promises on that right now.
Well,
but he seemed a little bit open to the idea of increasing local housing allowance and benefits specifically for housing. And some of the MPs will be delighted to see that. They really think that will make a difference to child poverty.
Well, that is very, very interesting. Let me scroll on to the other big story of the day, which is the aftermath of these sort of chaotic and angry scenes outside the Bell Hotel in Essex, where a migrant has been charged, I think, for assaulting a child, minor, and there have been demonstrations by parents, various political groups, far-right groups and stuff coming in as well, and counter-demonstrations. It's been a real mess. Now, in the aftermath of that, Nigel Farage made a big intervention today about, frankly, getting control back of the streets, and he talked about a whole set of, as it were, Nightingale or pop-up prisons and his plans for deportations. Just tell us a bit more.
Yeah, I mean, basically, I think Nigel Farage feels that his finger is on the political pulse on crime on this one. And it's part of what Reform have been trying to do over the past few months about actually setting out their stall on policy. So sending prisoners abroad to El Salvador, you might have heard that one before. It sounds very Donald Trump, doesn't it?
It does.
Similar to sort of his plans to send people to Venezuela. But yeah, so there's that. There's the building of more prison places. He basically wants to be the antidote to what Keir Starmer is saying, I've got to let people out of prison more. Nigel Farage is saying, Tories have been soft on crime. I'm going to be the tough
He's
one
going to be the toughest
crime.
of all.
Exactly.
Very appealing to a lot of people, but also quite expensive. Any clear indication of where the money would come from?
Not really. I mean, he basically just keeps pointing to the idea. So he's saying it's going to cost £17 billion, what he's announced today. And he's now saying, well, actually, we're going to pay for that from net zero. We're going to pay for it from all the Doge crackdowns. There's only so many times you can spend this money. The problem is that I don't feel, and I don't think anybody out there feels, that it's really water off a duck's back for Nigel Farage. It is not touching him. He is very Teflon. And it doesn't matter how much Number 10 Downing Street are saying, this is fancy economics from Nigel Farage, you can't trust this guy. And that's exactly the argument the Tories are saying about him. It's not hitting. It's not cutting through to the voters. They don't care. People are still voting in terms of these opinion polls for Nigel Farage.
That is for sure the message of the polls. Natasha, thank you very much indeed for that. Let's talk now to Neil Basu, the former Assistant Commissioner for Special Operations at the Met. Neil, you were in the Met back in 2011 when we had a lot of trouble in London and other places, a hot and angry summer. There are beginning to be indications we might be heading towards that kind of thing again. What are the lessons, do you think, today's police should learn about what went on in your time?
Good evening, Andrew. Yes, I was the borough commander of Barnet during 2011, and no one who was in London policing that will ever forget it, or anywhere else in the country where rioting broke out. But lessons were learned from 2011, but of course, what changed dramatically, and in fact, probably from 2012 onwards, with the massive acceleration of smartphone ownership and social media and use of the internet and 24/7 media, was what used to be required was a trigger event. Something had to happen which would inspire some kind of riot, and it was the march on Tottenham Police Station following the shooting of Mark Duggan in 2011, and the incidents that happened around whether you believe that the police were heavy-handed or there were people who took over that, what was a very peaceful protest to start with, and turned it into a violent protest. Is that likely to happen again? Well, what you need is, you do need heat, you need anger, and you need somebody to blame, and you need that trigger. And what I would say, you've got
all of that. Sorry, I was going to jump in. You've got all of those in a sense, haven't you, with the migrant hotels and the issue around immigration, and different groups connecting with each other and firing each other up.
Yes, you have. And what you've also got is you've got much more likelihood of the trigger being pulled by social media. So you get much more speculation. We've seen this, haven't we? That this was a major trigger for Southport. Speculation on the identity of an attacker, speculation on who they are, the othering of an entire group of people based on that. That is spread like wildfire to hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people worldwide. People join in, all kinds of people, some elected, some not, some very powerful, some influencers, and that massively doubles down on the problem. If you add to that a lack of respect for authority, which is, we're probably in our 40th year of the decline towards respect for authority, but it has got worse and worse and worse. And that's everyone from politicians to the legal system to police themselves. Then yes, you do have the potential for a disaster, and police have to be ready for that. And you're right, they have to have learned the lessons from the past.
Well, let's hope that by talking about it, somehow we wish it away. There's a sort of general phrase that I'm hearing more and more in politics, a fear that, quotes, we're losing control of the streets. And by that, they're not really talking necessarily about riots or anything like that, but about, shoplifting, street crime and so on. As a former Met man, what is your view about the numbers of actual physical police on the streets at the moment and what the Home Office needs to do about that?
Well, they do need to increase it. There's no doubt that your trust and confidence in the policing system comes from how effective they are at dealing with the problems that are the most important to you. Most people are not affected by the most serious of crimes, but when you haven't got the money, the resources, or the people, you tend to put all of your resources into the most serious of crimes that affect the least number of people. So I think people are getting very upset that antisocial behaviour, what is loosely called lower level crime, our criminal justice system is based on different tiers of crime. If you're going to ignore that, you're going to annoy the majority of people. I think that's where people have started to feel unsafe. And we have had 20 plus years of rising sentencing, full prisons. It's not that police haven't been effective. You could argue in some respects they've been very effective. That's why you've got completely full prisons. What you haven't had is any investment in the whole of the criminal justice system. So now you're left with not enough police officers, not visible enough, not dealing with enough of the crime that affects you as a person. Nobody operating the court system, where they're massively underfunded with cases being listed for 3, 4, 5 years' time, and prisons which are hugely overcrowded with very few prison officers, and then a probation service that when prisoners are released have not got the funding to manage the people who are released. Well, I don't believe in wishing anything away, to use your previous comment. What you have to do is have a serious conversation about how you invest in this, and you have to invest in absolutely. Not just one part of it.
Invest is the key word. I started the show talking about the economy, and that's what it all comes back to again and again. Neil Basu, thank you very much indeed for that. Now, we need to save more for our pensions, and we may not get our state pensions until we are a little bit older than we had expected. Those are the headlines from a government review into what's been called the retirement crisis. Ministers want to re-establish a pensions commission because they are worried that people who plan to retire in 25 years' time are going to be quite a lot less well off than those retiring today. Nearly 15 million of us are not saving enough for our retirement, but in the end, I suppose that's their lookout. How far should we go in forcing them to save? Let's talk now to Lord Hutton, who was Secretary of State for Work and Pensions under Tony Blair. Does he think that a rise in the pension age is now inevitable?
I think if you were to look at the demographics, you'd probably say yes, it is. And I think we've done the right things in the last 20 or 30 years, making sure that our state pension system is sustainable. People don't really understand the way the state pension works. They often say, well, I paid my national insurance contributions, I've paid for my pension. Actually, that's not how it works. You pay for today's pensioners, and today's working age population pay for yours. So we have an obligation to make sure that the pension scheme is sustainable between the generations and across the generations.
We always have to have enough people working to pay for the pensioners.
We do.
And that's one of the big issues. The triple lock is talked about a lot. And again, I talk to some of your colleagues, and they say candidly, in fact, the OBR has said, long term, this is not really affordable. If pensions are going to rise by the highest of whatever it is, inflation, average wages, or
2.5% of inflation,
if pensions are always to rise by whatever's the highest, 2.5% or inflation or average wages, up and up and up, for a country with an ageing population, it just won't work.
They won't work. I think the triple lock was a good instrument to actually address some of the fundamental problems that we were facing 15, 20 years ago about pensioner poverty. But it can't last indefinitely because it is skewing the whole thrust of welfare spending towards people of retirement age. And I think there's a very pressing case for more help to be given to working age adults, particularly with children who are really on the breadline, on the poverty line. So it's going to have to change at some point. And I think we've just got to be honest with ourselves about that. It is difficult because a quarter of all voters are pensioners, and of course,
and they vote, and they're very vocal.
Do, and politicians get very anxious about that. But the money's got to come from somewhere. And I think we've got to have an honest debate in the country about how we are going to have a sustainable welfare system going forward. Because, as I said, Andrew, the money's got to be found from somewhere. And I think putting all of that load onto the very heavy load onto working age adults is not sustainable over the long term. We've got to find a better balance, I think.
Let me turn to the final suggestions coming out of the government today on pensions, which is that far too many of us, around 15 million, simply don't pay enough, save enough for our pensions, don't pay enough into our pension pots. I guess my question is, that's their lookout. They're going to be poorer as pensioners. Should the government really be forcing people to save more?
I think this is the biggest question in terms of pension policy that we're facing as a country. Nearly half of all working age adults are not paying or saving for their retirement. And I think it is not reasonable to say, well, it's it's on their shoulders, let them
really?
deal with it. No, because there will be a consequence for us in the welfare system if people aren't retiring with adequate income, because we can't shrug our shoulders as a decent society and say, well, sorry, you're on your own now. We will get drawn into that debate as taxpayers unless we are able to find a better way of getting more people to contribute. So what the government has done today in reforming the Pensions Commission, absolutely right. The biggest, and I think one of the most successful areas of policy making in this century was Adair Turner's Policy Commission on Pensions. We totally transformed workplace saving. We went from about 50% of employees now to nearly 80% of employees saving for their retirement. The problem has always been low-wage employees who often opt out, and the self-employed who weren't covered by the auto-enrolment scheme that Adair Turner recommended back in the early 2000s.
Let me ask you a little bit about the wider situation at the moment, because everyone I talk to says that the bond markets are staring very, very hard at Britain at the moment, and that we aren't very, very far away from a Liz Truss moment again.
I think it's quite a tight space the government's in, and I'm sure they are absolutely focused on the bond market and what the bond market is telling government about its confidence in its fiscal and public spending strategy. I mean, if the government had no borrowing at all, well, we could ignore the bond markets, but we rely on borrowing. So it is incumbent on ministers to pay very close attention to the bond market. I think there's a job of education, there always is in politics, just to make sure people understand where money comes from for government spending. And I think a lot of people really don't understand.
You say a lot of people. Do you think Labour backbenchers understand? I mean, there's all sorts of demands coming in day after day for more spending on this, more spending on that. And, you look at Rachel Reeves, even when she's got a smile on her face, and the tension there must be extraordinary.
I think it is tough for them right now. But, as I said earlier, Andrew, the money has got to come from somewhere to do all of these things. And a very, very important part of establishing and maintaining confidence in the bond markets is to have credible fiscal and public spending policies. And if they start to look under pressure or they start to sort of crumble, you're in a world of trouble. So the government absolutely has got to keep on solid foundations there.
So whatever Keir Starmer does in the autumn when he goes to the party conference and so on, he has to convince the world, as it were, that he has a tight grip on public spending and he is properly in control.
He absolutely has to do that. Otherwise, the Labour government is going to find itself in a sea of trouble.
Lord Hutton, John Hutton, thank you very much indeed for coming in.
My pleasure.
Up next, the Prime Minister was grilled on welfare and rates of child poverty today in the Commons. Can he be convinced to lift the two-child benefit cap? I'll be joined by the former Shadow Chancellor in Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party time. The time now, however, 6:33, and Amelia Cox has your news headlines.
A man has been found guilty of murdering two men and leaving their bodies in suitcases near to Clifton Suspension Bridge in Bristol. 35-year-old Justin Mosquera, who's from Colombia, killed Albert Alfonso and Paul Longworth at their flat in West London last year. The UK has joined 24 other countries in calling for an immediate end to the war in Gaza. They say the suffering of civilians has reached new depths and warned Israel's aid delivery model is dangerous. And a boy who died in a bus crash near Minehead in Somerset last week has been named by police as 10-year-old Oliver Price. The coach slid down a 20-foot slope on its way back from a school trip. LBC weather, largely cloudy with showers in central and western areas tonight. Generally dry elsewhere, a low of 11 degrees.
This is LBC.
Terms apply.
This is LBC. Message Andrew Marr on WhatsApp now on 0345 60 60 973.
6:35. For the first time since the general election, the Labour left is beginning to flex its muscles as it contemplates the possibility of a new left-wing party under Jeremy Corbyn and prepares for more rebellions in the autumn. One of those who lost the Labour whip soon after the election and still hasn't got it back yet is the former Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell, who's been outspokenly defending his friend Diane Abbott after she was suspended for the Labour Party in a separate row. John started by talking to me about his own situation. How did it feel still not having the Labour whip?
I was suspended, if you remember, of the two-child limit.
Yes.
And I've been pressing like mad for movement on that. I was hoping that we'd have the poverty report the government promised by the spring. We're now told it's the autumn. So I've been trying to work as best I can behind the scenes to put pressure on. That's the first thing. And I did the same with disabilities. But you reach your limit, you know, and we're a year on, and we're doing stupid things now, winter fuel, not tackling the child poverty. All the child charities, all of them have lobbying the government to get rid of the two-child limit because it's the most important thing. Then we go through the disabilities benefits fiasco, what it was. And I'll give you the one that pushed me over the edge. There's a young man that got elected last time round called Chris Hinchcliffe. I don't think they expected him to win his seat, but he worked incredibly hard and he got elected. He brought together all the different environmental groups, town and country planning associations, you name them, all the big ones as well as small campaigning organisations on the environment about the planning and development bill. And I went to one of his meetings and they were saying we've engaged with the government all throughout and we thought we were really getting somewhere. Then we saw the legislation and the government ignored us. So what they did is they asked him would he move some amendments to the bill. He said okay, and I said well, I'll back you because I think you're right. He moves the amendments, then he has the whip withdrawn. Last week, the government accepted most of those amendments, so he was right. So every time we've been proven right, they still take disciplinary action. And it's counterproduction, and I'm losing members as a result of that in my own constituency.
Let me try to sort of channel the alternative government point of view on all of this, particularly around the benefits bill. It's pretty clear that the country is close to the edge when it comes to the bond markets. They're staring very, very aggressively at the UK, and they're looking for evidence that the government doesn't have a tight control of fiscal discipline. Any sign of that, and it may be that we're back into a Liz Truss-style meltdown.
Understand
and so that is what is kind of terrifying them, really. And therefore, when it comes to making these very, very unpopular decisions as far as Labour Party members are concerned, there is a reason for it.
Right, there's two issues there. I understand that completely because I was facing the same thing. Two issues there. One is fine, but if you're introducing a system, you've got to make sure it works. And by cutting benefits in that way, it wasn't going to work. It was simply major problems would come after us. So the whole debate was around sequencing. We all agree we want to get people back into work. So you put the support in place and then the system will work effectively. And you save the money then. That's the first thing. And the second thing is really, if you need a breathing space, well, the best thing, and you need some money to get that, well, the best thing to do is look at taxation and you introduce further redistribution. Now, those two measures, they completely ignored, and it was so obvious what needed to happen. And it wasn't the usual suspects. It wasn't me. I was supporting others that were saying, look, this is wrong. And it was across the parliamentary Labour Party spectrum. It was quite remarkable in the scale that was going on. So I just thought, well, they've switched off. And then what I think also what pushed me over the edge, then the briefings coming out of number 10, it's the Whip's office at fault. The Whip's office all the way along did their job and they did it well. They listened to the individual MPs, they reported back what was going on, and number 10 ignored them. And I know that very early on, they said disability benefits is going to cause a problem. My Whip, Vicky Foxcroft, resigned over it. So again, I just thought, I'm really annoyed.
They're simply not listening.
Well, they're not listening, but they're screwing things. We've had an Adelaide government for 14 years. We want it to work and be successful.
Now, we started this conversation, you mentioned the two-child cap. That's coming back again in the autumn, as you said. People who are not natural allies of John McDonnell, such as, for instance, Gordon Brown, are on the same side about this. Yeah. serious is it going to be for the government if they refuse to move on the two-child cap?
I can't believe they won't. I can't believe they won't. But if they don't, they'll have all the major children's charities. I think they'll have a range of religious institutions as well. I did a conference at the weekend. We had Kate Pickett from the Equality Trust. She did that book, The Spirit Level, with Richard Wilkinson. And she just said to people, look, the easiest thing to lift children out of poverty now is about nearly 400,000 is to scrap the two-child limit. I can't believe the government aren't going to do that, but if they don't, they're going to face another wave of disillusionment and quite anger as well, and that'll include me.
All right, let's turn to taxation, because we talked about that as well. Now, as we both know, both Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves made very specific promises about working people and about income tax and VAT and national insurance during the election campaign, and they do not want to break those promises. Given that, where can they go for more taxation? Neil Kinnock suggested a wealth tax, but they seem to be pushing back on that. Where do you think they should be going?
If you look at last week, I launched with PCS, the trade union, who represent the tax gatherers, HMRC workers. They set out a number of proposals. Lord Prem-Sicker has been raising it in the House of Lords, the Professor of Accountancy. And it is like things, you are taxing wealth, you're taxing higher incomes, but it is about levelling up capital gains tax with income tax.
Making capital gains tax the same as income tax.
It is,
so
yeah.
To people listening, that means that your gains from selling shares, for instance, you're taxed at the same rate as if you were working.
Wherever you're making your income, it's got to be fair. So if you're out there working and you've got a basic PAYE, you're earning a weekly income and you get taxed as normal on your income, why aren't those who make their income from other sources doing that as well? My own view, I still think we need to look over longer term and look at land value taxation. But let's have that debate now rather than panic measures around a budget. But I think it is about Look, Keir got it right. The broader shoulders should carry the heaviest burden. And at the moment, the broader shoulders are making a large amount of money, particularly in the city. I would like a financial transaction tax discussed again. So it's about 13 or 14 different measures that they could take without having to impact on income tax on people.
I'm sorry, I'm beginning to hyperventilate here. You just said Keir got it right a moment ago. You've been very rude about him as well.
I keep saying he's got it right, but stick to what he said originally. The broader shoulders carry the highest burden. Do not expect disabled people in the poorest in our society carry that burden. That's where he got it wrong.
You've been a Labour Party man all your life. You haven't got the whip at the moment. I don't think it's likely you're going to get the whip anytime very soon, he said gently. Do you think you're going to get back into the Labour Party? Do you see yourself with a Labour Party future, or do you look to your old friend Jeremy Corbyn and think there is an alternative?
No, I'm Labour and I'll stay within the Labour Party and I'll keep on pressing to get the whip back. Interestingly enough, I don't want to be arrogant about this, but every time I warned them about one of the issues that they've confronted and got it wrong, I actually have been proved right. And it's not just me, it's a whole range of people. They need to start listening to the Parliamentary Labour Party who are going back to their constituencies and they're coming back and saying what the real world is all about. So I'm hoping there'll be change, and I'm hoping this budget could be the start of it. Whether I get the whip back is incidental. I want the whip back. Jeremy and Zara are looking at setting up the sort of New Left Party or whatever. And what I'm saying is wherever people are, whatever structure or party they're in, whether Labour or the New Party or in trade unions or campaigning organisation, we've got the same objectives, work together.
Isn't there a danger that a new party will help split the left vote and let in reform?
It might do, and that's why I was saying time and time again to the leadership, and I said to Keir several times, you should bring Jeremy back in. Whatever they think about Jeremy himself, he is popular out there amongst a large number of people. He would be an asset to the Labour Party, and I still think there should be some rapprochement where Jeremy should be invited back. I know that's not realistic at the moment, but as we face the threat of reform, they need to wake up to that.
Very interesting. Let me turn back to where we started, Diane Abbott, because you've known her for a very, very long time. She got into trouble over things she said which implied there was a kind of hierarchy of racism, that people who are black had it harder than other groups, including travellers and Irish people and so on. Do you, first of all, understand and second of all sympathise with what she was saying?
Right. When she wrote that originally, she said she got it wrong and she apologised. That's it.
But she then unapologised.
No, well, she did this recent interview, and I've circulated it. If you listen to what she said, what she's saying is that there's racism out there in all different forms. one stark element of racism is if you're black, it's identifiable there and then. But if you're Jewish and if you're a traveller or something like that, it's not immediately obvious. So therefore, we have to understand there's different forms of racism. She didn't in any way, she'd never mentioned any hierarchy and all of that. So I think people need to listen to actually what she said. And if they do, there's a debate to be had. I think there was an overreaction from the Labour Party because they were following the headlines rather than what she actually said in that interview.
All right, John McDonnell, thank you very much. When it comes to Palestine action prescribed by the government as a terrorist organisation, everyone, including me, has to choose their words with care now. As it happens, I don't support any organisation calling for the destruction of the State of Israel. But last weekend, and the weekend before that, large numbers of people carrying homemade placards in support of Palestine were arrested. Over the past couple of days, more than 100. Outside Parliament, in Manchester city centre, in Edinburgh, in Bristol, at Truro Cathedral, and at a music festival in Glasgow. I think I'm allowed to ask whether this is a proportionate and sensible use of police time, particularly if these protests continue, particularly if they carry on being led by elderly and peaceful-looking people. I'm joined now by Lord Sumption, the former Justice of the Supreme Court. Lord Sumption, welcome onto the show. Do you have any misgivings when you see the number of police arresting what appear to be very, very peaceful people holding up these placards?
Yes, of course I do. The police are always overplaying their hand in cases like this. Either they don't take legal advice, or they don't pay any attention to the advice that they're receiving. But the law is perfectly clear. When you prescribe an organisation, it becomes a crime to support that organisation. It's not a crime to support the Palestinian cause in the Middle East. The crime consists in supporting this particular organisation.
So that deals with, as it were, the reported cases of people who've been arrested for flying Palestinian flags or saying, they support Palestine. But it doesn't really deal with, for instance, the octogenarian priests and others who were holding up placards saying, I support Palestine action.
Yes,
I just wonder whether you think...
That
is a crime. But do you think this is a moment where we've always got to be in a position where the state doesn't look an ass, the law doesn't look an ass? Do you think perhaps there's an element of state or legal overreach here?
Well, I think that Palestine action comes at the lighter end of the spectrum of terrorist organisations. Most of them, the ones that have been prescribed, have a much worse record than that. At the same time, the terrorism is defined as including cases where organisations set about causing serious physical damage. We don't know, at least I don't know exactly what damage was done at Brize Norton Airport, but the Palestine Action is an organisation which has left no doubt that it is concerned to cause damage. They say they're non-violent, but they are coercive. They wish to cause damage to businesses that they think are supporting Israel and to government resources. Now, if you cause physical damage like that, you're asking for trouble. It's perfectly possible for people who are demonstrating to make it clear that they support the Palestinians without supporting an organisation that is dedicated to causing physical damage.
I suppose, therefore, the question is this: how does society react to a situation in which more and more and more people are holding up these signs weekend after weekend after weekend? As we've been saying on the programme, the police have many other things to do, and there seem to be huge numbers of them, lifting people who are, frankly, certainly no physical threat to anybody.
Well, that's true, and I don't know what the proportion is, but I suspect that a high proportion of those arrested on these occasions are arrested simply for being present at a demonstration organised by Palestine Action. That is not a crime. If the police limited themselves to doing what is within their powers, they would probably be arresting many fewer people.
Very interesting. Sage advice. Lord Sumption, thank you very much indeed for talking to me. Now then, coming up, Failings in maternity care are costing the NHS a staggering £27 billion in legal fees. Why is this so bad and what can be done to fix it? The time now is 6:50.
Coming up at 7, Ian Dale leading Britain's conversation. Next on LBC.
Apply.
Tonight with Andrew Marr. Listen on your smart speaker. Just say, play LBC.
6:52. Israel has begun a major assault on Deir al-Balah, the last place in Gaza which hasn't been badly damaged by the war and where Israel believes hostages may be being kept, as it also seeks to evacuate 50 to 80,000 people from the area. Yesterday, Palestinian officials said Israel had killed at least 85 people looking for food in Gaza. Jasmine El-Gamal, the former Middle East advisor to the US Department of Defense under Barack Obama, joins me now. Thank you very much for joining the show. What do you make of this latest assault on this last place in Gaza, which really hadn't been touched before?
Thank you so much for having me, Andrew. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. What we're seeing in Gaza, obviously, it really is a case of trying to squeeze the entire population of Gaza into as small of an area as possible, deprive that area of food, medical supplies, and water, and force the population to have to leave or else be killed. That is basically the pattern that we've been seeing over the last several months. And those are all the eyewitness accounts that we've been seeing from people on the ground and people who've been there, including doctors and humanitarian workers.
Now, Israel challenges all these numbers about people being killed while they're looking or waiting for food. But it's very hard to get independent evaluation. You're getting numbers from the United Nations and elsewhere. What's your view about the accuracy of those numbers?
Yeah, thank you for raising that. I mean, obviously, this is a point that the Israelis and Israeli spokespeople have mentioned time and time again, which is saying that these numbers aren't true. So a couple of things here. I mean, one is we know that there are no independent international journalists that are allowed to go into Gaza to verify what people in Gaza, Palestinian journalists, Palestinian healthcare workers are already telling us. So in raising doubt on those numbers, Andrew, what the Israelis are basically trying to say here is don't trust the Palestinians on the ground telling us what's happening to them. The other people who have been on the ground, though, including someone I just spoke to last Friday, are doctors. They're surgeons, a lot of them from London and the UK, who have been volunteering in Gaza during their annual leave. And I spoke to one of those surgeons last Friday. His name is Morgan McMonigal, and he was telling me about his experiences there and the stories that we're hearing from people who have been on the ground match up much more closely than the numbers that the Israelis are giving us. And of course, you see it on social media. I mean, we're seeing these things happening every day. We really don't need people to tell us what's going on.
Yet again today, there's a kind of international plea for this war to end. Lots of countries, including Britain, are asking the Israelis to pause this, stop this. And yet the international community, including your own country, the United States, appears to have almost no purchase on Mr. Netanyahu and his government. No influence really at all.
Well, that's such a great point to raise. The word influence is really important here. I don't really think it's about influence. I think it's about the willpower and the political will to use that influence. The U.S. obviously is the largest arms supplier, the largest supporter, the largest political cover on the international stage to Israel. The EU is Israel's largest trading partner. That's huge leverage. That's huge influence. So it's not that they don't have it, Andrew. It's that they so far have refused to use it. And that's something that really boggles the mind, because when we see a 4-year-old child yesterday dying of starvation, her name was Razan Abu Zahir, when there are hundreds of trucks on the Egyptian side of the Rafah crossing ready to enter Gaza, you really have to wonder what's happened to the state of the world.
Indeed. Thank you very much indeed for that, Jasmine Al-Gamal. Thank you so much for talking to me. Britain faces a £27 billion bill for maternity failings by NHS England. Legal challenges following the deaths or life-altering suffering of hundreds of women and babies in trusts around the country. Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, has launched a rapid national inquiry into maternity care in England, but this looks like another huge bill without the money to pay for it. Let's talk now to Jess Brown-Fuller, the Liberal Democrats hospital spokesman. Jess, thanks very much indeed for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
Can you start by reminding people of the kind of maternity failings we're talking about?
Absolutely. I held a debate on maternity care in Westminster Hall in the House of Commons, and in preparation for that spoke with families from across the UK that had been failed, and quite often, although sometimes it was failings in the care that the mother received, quite often it resulted in those families going home without their child. Because of widespread failings. And actually what those families were saying to me is that they couldn't turn the clock back on the treatment that they received, but they did believe that there could be lessons, valuable lessons learned in maternity care that they felt weren't being learned going forwards.
This might seem a stupid question, in which case forgive me, Jess, but why do you think maternity care is the focus for so many failings? You know, why isn't it general orthopedics or heart surgery? Why is it maternity care that seems to be throwing up again and again and again so many problems?
I think we've had a crucial amount of underfunding in maternity care over recent years. We used to have funding specifically ring-fenced for maternity training. That has now been axed, and my party is calling for the reinstatement of that funding so it's ring-fenced, so those that want to enter the maternity sector can, but also that there has been, and it was established very clearly in the Ockenden review that Donna Ockenden undertook, that there has been failings within the systems that we work within maternity care, which is why that we are calling for the IEAs, the actions that were laid out in the Ockenden report to be implemented now alongside Wes Streeting's inquiry into maternity services. Both things can be done at the same time, and one should not be leaving the other one to be kicked down the road.
It's an incredibly important and very distressing in some respects story, but thank you very much, Jess Fuller-Brown. Thank you for coming in and talking to LBC about it. But we're out of time, and I'll be back with you tomorrow. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on both Global Player and the LBC app, where you can read and you can watch the latest from LBC. Download the official LBC app for free from your app store now. Coming up at 10 on LBC, Ben Kentish. But right now, it's time for Ian Dale.
Thank you very much, Andrew. The government has ordered an earlier than expected review into the state pension age, which will look into whether it needs to be increased from 66, as the age most of us live to also goes up. The Work and Pensions Secretary has also expressed concern that most people aren't saving anything like enough money to sustain themselves when they have retired. Given all of this, isn't it inevitable that younger generations are going to have to work until much later in their lives than 66?